This is Monster Hunter Rise. I picked this up on PC after playing quite a bit of it on Switch because I always want to support these games coming to PC, and I'm a huge Monster Hunter fan. I honestly have been since the very beginning, when I used to rent the original PS2 game back in like 2004 or 2005, because no one around here actually had it for sale, so I ended up renting it like 7 or 8 times because it was the only copy that I could find. But anyway, this is a series that I have a lot of love for and also understand a lot of the complaints about it that people have as well. So here we go. This is the newest entry into the Monster Hunter series, coming off of the massive global success that was Monster Hunter World. This one was actually developed by a different team from World. It was developed by the Portable team, the same people that did like 3 and 4 and Generations and all those games. Monster Hunter World was actually a different team, and that game was really about, it wasn't exactly a side game, but it kind of was in the sense that it was about taking Monster Hunter to the mainstream, to make it more palatable to a wider audience, and to sort of get it the attention that it has so deserved for so long, because it's been a very niche game up to this point, or niche, however you want to say that. It's the kind of game that has a very hardcore fan base ingrained within it, but it also isn't like massively globally successful, and World changed that to a certain degree by being more, I guess, palatable to a wider audience. But I think your enjoyment of Rise is going to depend heavily on whether or not you have played a Monster Hunter besides World, and you know that that's not how they usually are. Rise is effectively sort of a halfway point between the classic Monster Hunters like 3 and 4 and World, being more or less a return to the classic formula while also keeping a lot of World's quality of life changes and stuff to make a sort of hybrid modern Monster Hunter, and I think it does that job really well. So some of the quality of life changes from World that you're going to see return here are things like being able to gather while moving, having a more detailed map that shows you monster locations much more clearly, having a map that is not filled with loading zones and is actually all one contiguous open area with no loading screens, the really convenient drop-in, drop-out multiplayer, and other stuff in the interface, like for instance the really useful, fully customizable quick-use radial. I'm really glad they brought that back, by the way, because I get a lot of use out of that radial, and the fact that you can customize it to contain whatever items you want is super useful, so I'm definitely glad they kept that. Some stuff that isn't returning from World are mostly the things that people kind of complained about because they changed the balance of the hunts to be a little bit more annoying than they should have been, in my opinion, and in a lot of other people's opinion too. So things like the mantles are no longer here. A lot of people felt that they changed the overall feel of the combat and the way that you had to interact with the monsters and the way that the monsters suddenly conveniently had a ton of attacks that left stuff on the ground and did other things that the mantles were weak to. They felt that it's just sort of changed the flow of the combat in a negative way. So mantles no longer exist, as well as the Clutch Claw. The Clutch Claw doesn't exist either because people felt that, especially in Iceborne, monsters had way too much health because you were expected to basically tenderize the monster for half an hour with the Clutch Claw before you were able to fight it properly, and that led to hunts being a bit of a slog at times, especially in Iceborne. So yeah, those things are out of the game, although I do admit that I do kind of miss the sling. I did think the sling was a pretty cool addition, and although it's not a major factor, it was fun to have, and I do sort of miss it here. You'll notice that, of course, graphically the game is nowhere near as impressive as World. That is partially because this game had to target the Switch hardware, which is quite weak, so it doesn't look as good, but also because traditionally Monster Hunter games are not about graphics, and World had very nice visuals, and that's partially because it was, of course, for a wider audience, so it sort of needed that to situate its way into the mainstream a little bit more, but traditional classic Monster Hunters are not very concerned with graphics all that much, and you kind of see that here, although in my opinion it still looks pretty good because it is very heavily stylized. You can of course see that it is not as purely graphically impressive as World. This also transitions into the hunting areas themselves, being still contiguous open areas with no loading screens, but not as visually impressive as the areas that Monster Hunter World has, and with a lot less environmental detail. In my opinion, there's still a lot of very good stylized detail in these worlds, but I am also the kind of person that's used to how classic Monster Hunters looked, so I'm going to appreciate that sort of thing. But in terms of just like pure graphical fidelity, yeah, obviously it falls short of what World did. And although I do admit that I somewhat miss the really nice environment detail that World has, you could also argue that that was part of the reason they had to use those guiding fireflies to show you where gathering points were and stuff, because it was so busy visually that you couldn't always see them, whereas this more pure stylized art style does give you a really clear visual of all of the areas, and you don't need the fireflies anymore to let you know where gathering points and stuff are, because all of that is very visually obvious again. The PC port itself seems pretty good so far. I know that some people had a problem with the game not being able to save, but as far as I'm aware, they did fix that. I didn't encounter that bug, so I can't really speak on it, but it is something to consider. But like I said, I'm pretty sure they fixed that at this point. And it is nice to have all the extra resolution options, the more advanced settings menu with stuff like ambient occlusion and texture filtering and all that stuff, and of course being able to actually run it at a modern frame rate as opposed to the Switch version, which stays at 30 FPS at the best of times. This is totally uncapped. I tend to run it at 120 and it works fantastically, so that's awesome. And it does even have enhanced texture resolution for the PC, so even though you can tell that the game is not the most graphically impressive thing out there, it has been enhanced for the PC version, which I do appreciate. So what's new in Monster Hunter Rise? Well, for one, the Palamutes are a new thing, which are adorable dogs that can accompany you on your battles. These will hunt monsters with you and have various different pieces of equipment that they can use, from giant shurikens to crazy umbrella things that can actually guard for you and some other stuff like that, and like magic ninja scrolls. It's pretty great. They're actually really fun, and you can also ride them in a way that allows you to get around the maps faster than you normally could walk, which is pretty cool. And the buddy system is pretty customizable, so you can have one cat and one dog with you, or you can take 2 dogs or 2 cats if you want to. So that's pretty cool, allowing you to actually customize a little bit more about them. However, the big headlining change here in Rise, and in fact what the game seems to be named after, is the Wirebug. The Wirebug is, in my opinion, one of the best things they've added to Monster Hunter in a really long time. It is a movement option that allows you to basically grappling hook your way around the environment. You can even chain it together to grappling hook multiple times through the air. It allows you to do all sorts of stuff, and it makes you extremely mobile, more so in this game than you've ever been in Monster Hunter. Even with the sling in World, you weren't as mobile as you are in Rise. It gives you all sorts of new movement capabilities and allows you to completely differently traverse the environment from how you may be used to. As a result, there's a lot more verticality in the environments. There's a ton of extra paths and little secret ways to find through the areas, and using your Wirebug in a clever way is encouraged, and in fact almost necessary, because it also seems that they have increased the aggressiveness of a lot of the monsters and their overall speed as a result of how agile you can be now. In terms of their movesets and stuff than they used to be, they just seem to attack more often and have attacks that cover more ground. Even previously seen monsters like, say, the Anjanath that was introduced in World, the big fire-breathing T-Rex, now has several more moves, including a huge frontal fire blast that it didn't have before, and these moves are used more often and more aggressively now than they were before to encourage you to be mobile. You can even use what's called a wire fall, which is a sort of mid-air recovery ability that allows you to recover yourself from a huge impact in mid-air and actually jet around and go back into the fray, or exit and use an item if you need to. Whatever you need to do. It's a really awesome system, and it is super fun to zip around the environments like a crazy person because it's really fast and just super satisfying and rewarding to get used to. You can even chain it into wall runs. You can run up or along walls using the Wirebug, and it also has some offensive options in the form of what are called silk binds. Every single weapon class has 3 different silk bind attacks. You can use 2 of them at any given time that add a new level to the combat as well, because this gives every single weapon more attacks than it's had before, using your Wirebug cooldowns to actually use some sort of offensive maneuver. Everything from huge aerial leaps that give certain weapons that were normally very grounded more of an aerial attack option, to crazy stuff like turning the sword and shield into like a death blender and some other stuff like that. It's really neat, and I heavily appreciate the addition of the Wirebug. Like I said, I think it's one of the coolest things they've added to Monster Hunter in a long time, and I hope they continue using it in future installments because it's just so fun to use. All of these new movement options and stuff do take a little bit to get used to, but it is very enjoyable once you sort of perfect the new movement system and things. I know the joke is that you need like 6 tentacles to play Monster Hunter correctly because of the controls, but that's not strictly true. You only really need like 3 tentacles, and this game really helps to give you a lot more movement options to make the game feel less, I guess, grounded and clunky, which I know is one aspect that some people complain about. Some other new things include the switch skills, which are a variety of new attacks and things that you can switch around in your given weapon. So every single weapon has 3 sets of 2 switch skills that you can switch between. And the fact that you have 3 silk bind moves and can choose one to replace another one is one of these switch skills. This allows you to actually customize your weapon's moveset a little bit, giving you new attacks and new capabilities in place of others, which is a really neat idea, and actually kind of makes me wonder if it's not going to be part of the future of Monster Hunter, being able to customize more about each weapon's individual moveset, so that two different people using the same weapon might actually be playing relatively differently depending on which combos and skills they have attached to it. I think that'd be a really cool place for the future of the series to go, and although I don't expect it to become like God Hand level, customize every aspect of every combo, it is a neat idea, and I'm glad they're sort of setting the paving for that right now by giving you a variety of different movements and attacks and combos and things to use with your weapons and actually switch between them at any point you want before you go on a hunt at the hub area. Also new are the Rampage Missions, which are basically like tower defense meets Monster Hunter, which sounds kind of weird, but that's really what it is. You go to a specific area that's different from the normal hunting grounds and is instead filled with these various bits on the ground that you can construct what are effectively towers in. You can construct traps or bait or things like ballista and cannons that NPCs man, and even cannons and machine cannons and stuff like that that you can man yourself. And you can construct them at various points around the arena, and then waves of monsters will come in and try and batter down the walls, and eventually a final gate that you have to protect in order to win the mission. You can also use these other timing-based like super weapons on the sides of the area that you have to pull levers to use that just do huge damage in a very specific area, so it's about sort of herding the monsters to that area and then using it at just the right time to do massive damage. And you can also occasionally summon some friendly hero units as well. So it's actually a pretty neat idea. It gives you a different variety of rewards than a traditional hunt for a wider variety of monsters. So although it's not going to give you all of the materials that you need for one specific monster, if you're looking to make like one certain piece of armor or one certain weapon, it is good for giving you a smattering of various other materials all at once, and is just sort of a break from the traditional hunt missions to give you something different to do. There's also a new reward called defense tickets that you can get from doing this, and different difficulty missions will give you different kinds of defense tickets, and these are linked to a new system called weapon ramp up, where every single weapon has an additional slot for a ramp up, which is some sort of extra passive skill that you can give it using these tickets. They range from increasing its attack power by a base amount, just making it more powerful, to increasing its elemental damage, to more exotic specific stuff depending on the individual weapon you're talking about. There's also, of course, tons of other little side activities to do. Send your buddies on missions to hunt for you, send them in a submarine to gather materials for you, forge amulets in a crazy foggy pot thing. There's just a lot of stuff that you can do at the hub in between missions, get new dongo to eat, and some other things like that. So all of the traditional silly Monster Hunter characteristics are here in full force. There's definitely more of a focus on the endemic life in the areas, because a lot of the things that you could do before, like for instance a lot of the effects that the mantles had, are now actually found as endemic life that you can run across. So there's all sorts of useful stuff you can find, like cutterflies that increase your affinity so you'll do critical hits more often, to fish that make you more powerful or heal you if they swim into you, and some other crazy stuff like that. There's of course the great wirebugs you can get that allow you to traverse large swaths of the map very quickly, just jetting around the place like an insane individual. And of course there's the new pedalace system, which is sort of like an amulet that you carry with you, and going across these very plump, funny looking birds called Spira birds will give you a boost to your health, your stamina, your defense, and your attack, depending on the exact kind of pedalace you have equipped. This is just a little bonus. It's not like necessary to do the hunts properly, it's just a little bit of extra insurance that you can find if you want to, which is nice. So yeah, this game definitely has a heavy focus on exploring the areas, which is I think why they have them shrouded in like a fog of war the first time you actually go to them, and you have to explore them to uncover everything, because you're meant to become very familiar with the areas and the various bits of life within them to have more successful hunts. And in fact, there are even these things called felicicrows and a couple of other things that are termed lucky life that will actually give you more rewards at the end of the mission if you're able to find them before you complete the mission. Another thing that they've kept from World is the fact that you can have up to 3 large monsters in one map. Actually can encounter and even fight each other in turf wars. These are just as impressive as they were in World, only now they tend to happen pretty often, and they've made it a bit more interactive by allowing you to actually ride the monsters. By using your Silkbind attacks and by letting monsters attack each other, they eventually get worn down to the point where you can tie them down with your Wirebugs and ride them around for a while. And while you're riding them, you can just transport yourself to any part of the map that you have time for, as well as use light and heavy attacks that the monster uses. Pretty much all of its attack repertoire can be used by you actually, and you can just do tons of damage to other monsters this way, and eventually you can even charge up a big finishing move that's very impressive and does huge damage, and is also very good at breaking off monster parts and just littering the ground with tons of extra materials for you to loot, which is super useful when you're trying to get certain materials. So I like the fact that they've made the whole turf war thing a little bit more interactive by allowing you to ride the monsters around and instigate them yourself. That's pretty cool. Overall, I think Monster Hunter Rise is an excellent entry into the mainland Monster Hunter series. It does a lot of things that World did on the quality of life side, while also sort of returning to the more classic portable Monster Hunter feel for a new era, and I think that's a really good thing. I think it's awesome, and the Wirebug is an amazing addition, and all of the new additions to the various weapon movesets and things are also super cool. There are a ton of new monsters for you to find and hunt peppered throughout the various star ranks, so you'll be encountering new monsters from the beginning to the end, and there's a lot of monsters here, considering the game has the advantage of coming out after many Switch updates. The PC version comes with all of that stuff by default, so that's awesome. And of course, we're all waiting for Sunbreak, because hopefully that's going to bring some new like G-rank style stuff. The return of purple sharpness is probably going to be a really huge expansion, and it's even promised to add some new mechanics, although there have been no details as of yet as exactly what those are. But yeah, it's an extremely good Monster Hunter game with tons of content, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan. And if Monster Hunter World was your first and only Monster Hunter, although you may be taken back a little bit by the fact that the traditional mainline games are not as graphically impressive and detailed as World was, you'll find a ton of really well animated, fun monsters to fight here with a whole bunch of stuff to do and a lot of character. The Monster Hunter games have always had a ton of character to them, and this is no exception. So thank you guys very much for watching. I will link the Steam store page to this game in the description below this video if you'd like to go check it out yourself. I'm just really happy that we're getting more Monster Hunter on PC and that Sunbreak is going to be a simultaneous release. That is super cool. As a person that's loved the series for a long time, finally seeing it on PC is a really good thing. So thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you next time.